how long is too long for a case to be resolved? You know, we've all heard that saying, justice delayed is justice denied. But what happens when that delay isn't just a few months, but years, maybe even a whole decade? Today, we're going to walk that razor's edge between a thorough investigation and a citizen's absolute fundamental right to a speedy case. And believe me, the stakes could not be higher. This isn't just some abstract legal principle we're talking about. At the very heart of this story is this number, 728 million pesos. Yeah, a truly staggering amount of public money right at the center of a massive scandal. Okay, let's dive right into this. We're looking at a case that became known as the fertilizer scam, involving a bunch of government officials in an absolutely enormous procurement deal. And as you're about to see, its journey through our justice system was, well, anything but fast. Just look at the timeline here, the sheer amount of time that went by. The first investigation kicks off all the way back in 2006. It takes 5 years before a formal complaint is even filed. Then another 2 years go by before they find probable cause. And it's not until 2015, that's almost a full decade after this whole thing started, that the case finally lands in court. So after all that time, you think the trial is about to begin, right? Wrong. In a really stunning twist, the Sandigan Bayan, which is the lower court here, just threw the entire case out. And the reason? They said it simply took too long. They called it an inordinate delay. Case closed. Or was it? So this shocking dismissal really forces us to zoom out and look at the legal principle that's at the very core of this whole conflict. It's a right that every single citizen has, but honestly, it's one that a lot of people don't fully understand. We're talking about the right to a speedy disposition of cases. What's that? Well, it's basically a promise baked into the system that you won't be left hanging in legal limbo forever. Whether your case is in a courtroom or before some government agency, the system is supposed to move things along promptly. And this isn't just a suggestion or a nice idea. It is a direct command from the highest law in the land. Article 3, Section 16 of the Constitution. It's crystal clear. This is a fundamental right. It's not a privilege. And that brings us to the $1 million, or in this case, the 728 million peso question. If a case takes 9 years, is that automatically a violation? Well, not necessarily. The Supreme Court has actually developed a very specific test to figure out when a delay crosses that line from just being long to being unconstitutional. So how do they do that, right? How does a court weigh the government's need to build a really solid, complex case against an individual's right to just get it over with? It's not as simple as just starting a stopwatch. There's a real method to it. It's called the four-factor balancing test. This is the official playbook. A court has to look at and weigh all 4 of these things. How long was the delay? What were the reasons for it? Did the accused actually speak up and say, hey, this is taking too long? And finally, what actual harm or prejudice did the delay cause? It's all a big balancing act. All right, so let's see how this test actually works in the real world. We're going to put the fertilizer scam case back on those scales of justice, and we're going to apply these 4 factors just like the Supreme Court did when the government appealed that dismissal. First up, the length. The accused argued, pretty simply, that 8 years is obviously an unreasonable delay. And I mean, yeah, it sounds like a really long time. But the Supreme Court said, hold on, you can't just look at the calendar. A complex 728 million peso financial case is a whole different beast than, say, a simple traffic ticket. Context is everything. Okay, so what was the reason for the delay? The defense basically said the investigators were just slow and inefficient. But the Supreme Court looked and found no evidence that they were deliberately dragging their feet or acting in bad faith. Instead, the court saw that the case's complexity, we're talking a huge amount of money, tons of transactions, and a lot of people involved, that alone could justify a longer investigation. Now, this brings us to the third factor, and honestly, this might be the most important one. For all those years that the investigation was going on, the accused were completely silent. They never once filed a motion complaining about how long it was taking. They only started shouting delay after the case was actually filed against them in court. And the Supreme Court basically said, sorry, you can't just wait until you're about to lose the game to start complaining about the rules. And finally, was there any real harm done? Any prejudice? The accused argued that the long wait caused them anxiety and hurt their reputations, and while the court acknowledged that, they pointed out that the legal standard for prejudice is much higher. The defense couldn't prove that evidence had disappeared, or that witnesses were gone, or that their ability to actually defend themselves in court was concretely damaged by the time that had passed. So, with all four of those factors weighed and measured, the length considered in its proper context, the reasons found to be justifiable, the right not asserted when it should have been, and no real proof of legal prejudice, the Supreme Court was ready to make its call. And the verdict? A complete 180. The Supreme Court overturned the lower court's decision that dismissal was thrown out, and the case was ordered to finally proceed to trial. The court's ruling couldn't have been clearer. They said that after applying that four-factor balancing test, they found that while the whole process was definitely long, it did not cross the constitutional line into inordinate delay. Justice hadn't been denied. It was really just getting started.
So, what's the big takeaway here? What does this all mean for the average person who might find themselves caught up in the legal system?
Okay, here's what you really need to remember. First, yes, your right to a speedy case is real and it's protected by the Constitution. But second, delay is relative. It depends on the situation. And most importantly, and this is the absolute key lesson from this whole affair, this right is not a passive shield that just protects you automatically. You or your lawyer have to actively stand up and assert it. If you keep quiet for years and only complain when things aren't going your way, a court is probably going to say that you waived your right. Which really leaves us with this one big final question. It's the core tension this whole case brings to light. In our push to hold people accountable, especially in these massive, complex corruption cases, how do we make sure the process is both thorough and timely? How do we balance those scales so that justice is neither rushed nor forgotten? It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer.